Hello and welcome to Hot and Heavy, the Elaine podcast. I'm your host, Shivani Desai. Today I'll be talking about Season 3, Episode 13, The Subway. Hello everyone. It's good to be back. Took a week off for Thanksgiving and it was great. I had a wonderful break with my family and we didn't really do anything incredibly exciting except just stay home and spend time together, and had a nice dinner on Thursday, Thanksgiving dinner. I did pre-order all of it. I'm not ashamed to say that. I just wanted it to be relaxing for everyone. So that's exactly what we did. We put up our Christmas decorations, which is a great time. We make it fun. We put on Christmas movies and have a really fun family decorating day. And it was perfectly lovely. Over the break, my husband and I watched King Richard, which is the story of Richard Williams, who is the father to tennis legends Venus and Serena Williams. It was really good. I absolutely loved it. Just a perfectly done biopic story of this man, as complicated as he was. I'm a tennis fan, so I did know a little bit about who he was and how hard he fought for his daughters to get to the level that they did. I mean, in their background and just the unlikelihood that two young Black girls from Compton would be, the next, not just tennis champions, but tennis legends. The story itself is incredible. The acting by the entire cast, those young girls who play Venus and Serena, Will Smith as Richard Williams. I mean, just transformative performance. Everyone in the cast, I can't say enough great things about them. So highly recommend. I really don't think you need to be a tennis fan to enjoy it. I mean, I just happen to be a tennis fan. I happen to be an enormous Serena Williams fan. She's like my favorite player of all time. But even if you don't have that much of an interest in tennis, I still think it's such a compelling story because at its core, it's just the story about unrelenting love, with good intention, but maybe not executed always in the best way, but this unrelenting love and dreams that you have for your children, and taking your own history and using that as fuel to not back down. I mean, that's really, to me, that was the core of what Richard Williams is about. It was just this incredible story of what a father's love will do for the plan, as he would put it. This is part of the plan. I've made the plan. So really great movie. I'm so glad I watched it. Okay, so we have our first hot and heavy correction. In our last episode, Greg, our GOAT contributor, he had mentioned last episode how he thought that the character of Mr. Lippman, Richard Fancy, who goes on to play Mr. Lippman for the rest of the series, he made his first appearance in The Red Dot, the last episode, and that his name wasn't Mr. Lippman in that episode. And I think I didn't know how to respond to that. I was like, no, I'm pretty sure it was. Greg sent me this screenshot where it says, in the credits, Mr. Lippman is listed as Mr. Breckman. Richard Fancy, who plays Mr. Breckman in this episode, goes on to play the recurring character of Mr. Lippman. And apparently it's on the door. So the scene where Mr. Breckman, I guess, fires George for having sex with the cleaning woman, when George stops at the door and says, maybe the Christmas spirit, any leeway there, you can see on the door, it says, on the office door, it says Mr. Breckman. So I stand corrected. I had no idea. I did not observe that. So kudos to you, Greg, on that very keen observation. Okay, so let's get into this episode. The synopsis for my coffee table book is as follows. A subway ride leads to 4 very bizarre experiences for the gang. Train delays cause Elaine to miss a lesbian wedding where she was to be the best man. Jerry befriends a fat exhibitionist. George misses a job interview when a sexy scam artist seduces him and then robs him. While en route to pay $600 in traffic violations, Kramer overhears a hot tip on a horse. He is nearly robbed of his winnings until an undercover cop intervenes. This episode is written by Larry Charles. So we start out the episode, all 4 of them are at Monk's. Kramer is going on and on about a very elaborate subway route to Coney Island. And Elaine finally says, couldn't you just take the D straight to Coney Island? Well, yeah. It's mentioned that George has a job interview. This is our first time Jerry compares him to Biff Loman, who George says is the biggest loser in American literature from Death of a Salesman. Elaine's going to a lesbian wedding, and George asks Elaine, now, at the lesbian wedding, who's the groom? Do they flip a coin? And George also says, whenever I see a lesbian, I think they're looking at me thinking, that's why I'm not a heterosexual. Jerry is forced to pay, and he calls them a bunch of deadbeats. The purpose of this scene, of course, is to set everything up. We find out that everyone will be taking the subway, specifically for Elaine, a lesbian wedding, and George for an interview. My take, just to focus on the exchange between Elaine and George, I feel like that could still happen today. The whole, how do they decide who's a groom? Look, I mean, it could happen today based on the age group of people sometimes that I interact with. I could definitely see this, maybe not a flip a coin type thing, but I could see this kind of a question coming up. And I think that just goes to show how bold it was for this show to have this storyline in 1991, 30 years ago. They were talking about Elaine going to a lesbian wedding. And I like that Elaine's role in the wedding isn't met with any sort of like negativity or like cheap jokes by the main four. Obviously, later we'll see what happens with that lady in the subway. But it's just brought up. George asks kind of a dopey question, and then they move on. Look, if George's question was phrased differently and maybe with more sensitivity, I think that is a curiosity to perhaps someone that's not familiar with the LGBTQ community. So I can see that being a question asked, maybe not the way George asked it, but I did like Elaine kind of pointing out like, yeah, they flip a coin, because that is kind of the reaction you should have. And watching this, it reminded me long time ago, back at least 15 years ago, a friend of mine who I've known since I was 14 from high school, she came out as a lesbian in college. And so years later, she was getting married. And unfortunately, I couldn't attend the wedding, but I, of course, wanted to send a gift. And all of a sudden, I found myself kind of freezing when I wanted to address the card and address the package with the gift in it. I said, well, gosh, I don't know. Does she take her wife's name? Does her wife take her name? It was one of those moments where I was like, oh my God, am I just such an ignorant asshole right now? I don't know. But knowing her as well as I'd known her, and knowing that she wouldn't chastise me, I reached out and I said, hey, I am so sorry if this is not an appropriate question, but I just don't want to make a mistake. How are the last name things working? Because even with straight couples, you can't be sure that someone's going to change the last name. And so anyway, I just always try to be really sensitive to those things because it's your name. Your name means something and it's your identity. So I really want to make sure I'm being respectful of that. And no surprise, she was so gracious and so appreciative that I asked, and turned out that both of them hyphenated their last name. So they each took on their partner's name in a hyphenated form. So yeah, that was all I needed to know. So I think that 30 years ago for George to ask that question, okay, it was played for a little bit of a laugh and to show that George is such an ignorant idiot. But I think at its core, it's one of those things where I think he really did want to know. And later we'll see him stumbling through questions about, Susan being a lesbian and all that. But at any rate, that moment in that scene, in the opening scene of this episode, reminded me of that exchange I had with my friend from high school, and just how, when you're learning about new things, I really think, and this can be true for so many things nowadays, instead of instantly getting offended, if you know that the person isn't coming at you with ill intent and they've asked maybe a question that is insensitive, if you come at them really aggressively, and I've seen it firsthand, it's just going to make them be more afraid to learn. if you take those people and you embrace them with some grace and some warmth and say, hey, this is actually what you should say, or, we really don't want to use that term because A, B, and C, or actually this is why we do this in this culture. And, I'm glad you asked, kind of thing. So that's really, if we just give some people grace to learn and if they really genuinely want to learn, then let's embrace that. Okay, this went off on a tangent. I'm sorry about that. Moving on. The next scene, we're in the subway. All four of them are on the same train at this point. Kramer is going through his traffic violation tickets. It's going to cost him $600. And there's all sorts of things. No doors, which is probably the craziest one. Kramer, Elaine, and Jerry give a blind guy some money. He's playing the violin. He comes by. Of course, George says, I can't carry change in these pants. Whatever. George is just cheap. Jerry is on his way to pick up his stolen car, we find out. And yeah, the car that was stolen in the alternate side episode has been found. And it's actually in better shape than it was when it got stolen. And since the impound lot is near Coney Island, he's trying to convince the others to come with him to Coney Island. Come on, it could be years before I get back. Elaine says, I can't. I'm the best man. George is like, what are you, Satan? I got to get to this interview. I'm so close to getting this job. And Kramer's like, come on, I've got all these tickets. What are you talking about? And Jerry's kind of whining, can't go on the rides alone. And then they all disembark the train, stare at each other. The men say nothing and walk away. Elaine just says, see ya. The purpose of this scene, we get some more exposition. Kramer is paying off his parking tickets and Jerry is picking up his stolen car. My take, there's not much to it, but I like how Elaine is the only one to say goodbye when they all get off the subway. I think it's kind of sweet. We're definitely moving into the more cynical Elaine, but that moment, it's still a little bit of a taste of early Elaine where she's the one that wants to say goodbye. All right, so the next series of scenes are just all the subway scenes. So I'll just go through them really quick. They all get on their individual cars to their respective destinations. Kramer can't get a seat. There's a big physical comedy bit where he's trying to get a seat and everyone keeps sitting down in the seat he's about to sit in. Finally, he tries to squeeze himself into a large guy into a seat. Jerry's falling asleep on the train. He said earlier he was very tired, so he's just sleeping and keeps bumping into the guy next to him. George gets onto his train and, there's a beautiful woman next to him. They get eye contact and smile at each other. She asks, are you looking for a job? Oh, no, I'm looking for the stock page. George, of course, lies. What else is George going to do? I do very well, very well. Says he's in the market. The big one, the big boy, the big market. Tells a bunch of lies about working at the stock market. So this beautiful woman is played by Barbara Stock. The character name is Luann. She was a series regular on Dallas and guest starred in pretty much all the popular shows in the 80s. And I think she's really good in this role. She's very beautiful, very sexy, good combination of that like sexiness and beauty. In the commentary, Julie Louis-Dreyfus actually says, doesn't she look like Faye Dunaway? She is so gorgeous. And so you can see how she could lure George away with her charms. She's very, very good in this role. Elaine boards her train and there's no seat available. So she stands holding onto one of those poles and there's an older woman next to her. And they talk about how, back in that woman's day, back in the 40s, when she started riding the subway, that a man would give up his seat for a woman. And Elaine comments like, well, we've made so much progress, but we've lost those niceties. It's ironic. And she, I love this moment. No, what does ironic mean? So then they start talking about the gift she's holding. Elaine says she's going to a wedding. Oh, a wedding. I didn't think people got married anymore. This woman keeps asking questions and finds out, well, there's no he. It's two women are getting married. It's a lesbian wedding. This woman is extremely homophobic. You can tell right away she's offended. Elaine says she's the best man. Well, that woman is not a fan of any of that. She hasn't talked to someone on the subway in years, and first time she does, she talks to a best man from a lesbian wedding. So she walks away. And Elaine says, well, no, I'm not a lesbian. I hate men, but I'm not a lesbian. The homophobic woman on the subway is played by Rhoda Geminani. She's very recognizable to anyone who watched movies and television in the 80s. I knew her pretty well from Who's the Boss as Mrs. Rossini, but she was also in Ghostbusters. She was in Friends. She was in Moonlighting. And she's just one of those actresses, especially if you're from my generation. She just looks familiar. You know you've seen her in at least a couple of things. Her performance is perfect in this scene. I mean, I think she's perfectly lovely, even though she's a homophobic woman. The ironic bit is really good. I like that she asks, what's ironic? And then Elaine explains all of it and says, no, I don't know what that word means. Okay, I'm sorry. This just went off in another tangent in my head. I watched the Alanis Morissette HBO documentary called Jagged, all about the Jagged Little Pill record. So, isn't it ironic? Okay, so moving on. Jerry's still sleeping on his subway car. We get back to Elaine. Now she's just standing in a very crowded train, and there's a voiceover. She's thinking maybe she'll meet someone at the wedding. Maybe not. Then all of a sudden, her subway train stops. Meanwhile, with George, the woman gets to her stop and says, would you want to get off with me? I know you're probably on your way to a big important meeting or something. George hesitates, but he says, you know what? What's another million? And he gets off. He gets stuck in the door. Don't stop the train! Don't stop the train! Kramer is in his train, and he's overhearing these two guys behind him talking about horses and how one horse is a lock, loves the slop, mother was a mutter. Jerry finally wakes up, looks across from him, and there's a naked man in front of him, to which Jerry says, okay, you realize you're naked. And the guy says, I don't see any difference. Naked, clothes. Well, you should be sitting where I'm sitting. I got no problem with my body. Well, that's your problem. You should be ashamed of your body. So Jerry just fat shames this guy. Okay, so we go back to Elaine, more voiceover acting from JLD. Very annoyed, probably rats on the track. We're stopping for rats. There's a guy next to her who stinks. Something's rubbing up against her. What if she misses the wedding? She has the rings. What will they do? Then she starts comparing. Well, this is nothing. What about concentration camps? What about hostages? This is nothing compared to that. But no, it is something. This is a nightmare. She keeps going on, and then the lights go out. Purpose of all of these scenes, we're just seeing what each character's subway situation is. And my take, again, just to focus on Elaine's stuff, the conversation about the lesbian wedding with the woman is a solid scene and I think very realistic for that time. In 1991, a sort of traditional older woman would probably want to get away from a lesbian and would have this reaction, unfortunately. And I love that Elaine doesn't hide where she's going. You know, she's open. There's that slight hesitation, that little swallow of saliva before she says it and clears her throat. I love that acting choice, by the way. And she says it's a lesbian wedding, but I love that she says it. You know, she could have easily lied. And we've all been there, I think. We can sense a person's reaction sometimes. And Elaine totally knew this woman probably wouldn't be crazy about it. I mean, they're having a pleasant conversation, but Elaine knows this is probably not going to go much further if I mention this. But I love that it doesn't stop her from being honest. Deal with it, you homophobic subway lady. The voiceover stuff it's good and it's bad to me. I like it as a device. I think it's needed here. You know, she certainly couldn't be saying this stuff out loud. And I can't help but think it must have been a fun day on set. JLD didn't really have to think about her dialogue or delivering lines perfectly. She just had to, act out these nonverbal reactions. So that had to be fun. But the actual content of what the voiceover is saying, it's just not great. And in fact, in the commentary, JLD does mention that she doesn't think it's really working, what she's thinking or what the voiceover is, especially referencing concentration camps and hostages. She's like, ugh, cringe. She didn't say that, but that was the message she was saying. But that being said, I like her performances. I think her voiceover performance is very good. And the facial reactions, it's all very strong. I mean, how could it not be? It's JLD. All right, so the next few scenes, I'm just going to run through real quick. We go to the hotel. George and the woman arrive. Then we go to the off-track betting place. Kramer tells the guy in line behind him the same exact things those guys on the subway were saying. He takes all of his money for his tickets and says $600 for Papa Nick to win. All right, back in the subway, we see Jerry talking to the naked guy. They're bonding. One's naked, one's not naked, but they're bonding over the Mets. We go back to Elaine, more voiceover. She's regretting not taking a cab. Maybe in 5 seconds we'll start going. She counts to 5 with the banana in between each number. Nope, still here. She starts just in her head freaking out, screaming, move, move. Then they start moving and then they stop. Motherfucker! The purpose of this scene, just moving the stories along of Jerry and Elaine in the subway. And my take, I think this is the best of the Elaine voiceover. I love the counting with the banana in between each number. We've all been in these situations where on the outside we have to remain calm or seem calm, but our inner monologue is extremely irate and saying things we would probably regret if we said them out loud. So I like the relatability in that sense. And yeah, just the screaming is always funny to me. Next, we go back to the hotel. George is being handcuffed to the bed and goes on about how ugly his mother was in her bra and panties. It's so mean. Oh, and then Luann emerges from the bathroom completely dressed. It was a pleasure doing business with you, George, but I have to get going. $8? I wasted my whole morning on you for $8? Oh, she's so annoyed that the scam didn't work. He has no money. So she takes his clothes and he says, you can't just leave me here. Bye, George. Next, we're back at the off-track betting. Papanik is losing. Kramer is so distraught. But then we hear that he's gaining ground. Kramer starts mocking. I don't know. Turns out Papanik does win. He goes up to the window. Hey, give me my money. Back to the subway. Kramer has left the off-track betting place and he's being followed by a pretty sketchy looking guy that he saw make eye contact with him after he had his wad of money. The guy is on his tail and Kramer is trying to get away from him. And then we see Jerry and Mr. Exhibitionist getting off at Coney Island. Jerry finally has a Coney Island friend. All right, then back at the subway, we see Kramer getting caught by the guy and he says, give me your money. Then freeze, police. Well, turns out that blind violinist is an undercover policeman. The next scene, we are back at Monk's, all four of them at a booth. Jerry is excited. He had a great day at Coney Island. He never got his car, but man, he had so much fun with his exhibitionist friend. He got a stuffed gorilla that he offers to Elaine. She is miserable. Get that thing out of my face. She missed the wedding. George comes in wearing a sheet. He needs his spare key from Jerry's apartment. They're trying to figure out what happened. He says, please, I don't want to talk about it. So then they all decide to get up and leave. Well, Kramer can pay this time. It's not Jerry's responsibility because Kramer won a huge amount of money. Purpose of this scene, it's just a resolution to it all. Elaine missed the wedding. Kramer won big. Jerry had fun at Coney Island. And George had a terrible day and arrives in a bedsheet. My take, it's meh. I mean, George, it's funny that he comes in a sheet. I think that was funny. But I don't know, all in all, it's kind of a boring ending. And I do think of all the storylines, I think we could have gotten more information on the consequences of Elaine missing that wedding. I mean, she said she had the rings. I want to know what happened. I want to know what they did. I mean, it seems like a good opportunity to flesh that out a bit more. But no, apparently we needed a chase scene in the subway, which just seemed a little over the top and unnecessary to me. Okay, I am going to take a quick break and I will see you on the other side. Oh no. You're standing in a crowd and someone clearly hasn't used deodorant. You can't get away. You're trapped next to the stench. If only you had something to defend your nose against the horrible odor. Well, fear not, because now you can arm your nose against every conceivable stink you come across. Introducing Smell Quell Gel, a water-based ointment that will neutralize any offensive odors that invade your space. Just coat the inside of your nostrils with Smell Quell Gel, and within seconds, all whiffs and sniffs are guaranteed to prevent you from dry heaving. Smell Quell Gel isn't just for the natural reek of the human body. It can abolish industrial smells, garbage odor, and has even successfully neutralized every celebrity fragrance available at Kohl's. Using state-of-the-art technology, Smell Quell Gel absorbs your pheromones to sense your ideal scent and converts the stench accordingly. So you could go from open ass to freesia, sweaty feet to warm cookies, M by Mariah Carey to Fantasy by Britney Spears. Whatever your nose loves, Smell Quell Gel will take you there. Available at all Myanmar discount pharmacies, Smell Quell Gel is your only defense against a stinky punch in the face. Smell Quell Gel, the only way to quell the smell with a gel. And we're back. So there was an inside look for this episode on my DVD extras. Larry Charles talks about how he wanted to tell a story that takes place on the subway because it's a very New York City story. And in JLD's interview, she says having a lesbian wedding storyline was pretty risque back then. Also, fun fact, JLD was newly pregnant and very sick shooting this episode, fighting nausea the entire time. They also mentioned that the set for the subway was literally just on like 2x4s that crew members would sway and rock back and forth. And I'm like, oh my gosh, morning sickness, nausea. Poor JLD had to endure all of that rocking and swaying while she was trying not to throw up. Ugh, that sounds like a nightmare. And she says, all that reaction you see, those facial expressions you see, it's mostly just me trying not to throw up. So I already mentioned that JLD was part of the commentary for this episode, and it was also with Jason Alexander and Michael Richards. So all three of them did commentary. One thing I thought that was interesting and a very wise choice for them to change, Julia Louis-Dreyfus said that her original storyline was that she was supposed to be scared to ride the subway through Harlem, but it was scrapped because it came off, well, as racist or could be perceived as racist. Yeah, I think that's the only way to perceive it. Oh, in the scene with Julia Louis-Dreyfus and the homophobic woman, I thought it was really sweet. Jason Alexander just says, Julia, you were so good in this scene. It's the little things that pass through your head that read in your eyes that's so funny. And specifically, he was talking about the moment where she hesitates to say it's a lesbian wedding to this woman. I just loved that he gave her that compliment. And I love the phrasing of it's the little things that pass through your head that read in your eyes. Ah, beautiful. What an amazing compliment. Both of them, Jason Alexander and Julia Louis-Dreyfus, they loved doing the voiceover. And JLD says it's like an acting exercise. It's very fun. But like I said earlier, she really didn't think the voiceover content was very funny. I mean, she audibly says, ugh, when she says the concentration camps and hostages. She's like, see, that's not working. I'm glad you recognized that because I didn't think it worked either. And another comment by JLD, which I think it summed up why I'm not a huge fan of this episode. She says, well, not to be disparaging of the guest cast because we had some great guest actors in this episode, but she said she wasn't a fan of doing these separate storylines. It's always more fun to be together as a group. So that was her take on this episode. And then she also mentions at the very end where they're at Monk's and she's so distraught about missing the wedding. Originally, after Jerry's line of, so you missed the wedding, you'll catch the bris. She was supposed to say, why don't you blow it out your ass? But JLD could not get through it without laughing. She's like, I don't think it was cut so much as I just couldn't get through it. So they had to scrap the line altogether because I couldn't stop laughing. And I know I've seen that in the bloopers where she keeps trying to say, why don't you blow it out your ass? And she does recognize too. She's like, I don't even know if they would have kept that in there because it's a pretty crude line and it's pretty... It's kind of vulgar, so it might not have made it at all, but she's like, I'm pretty sure it was because I don't think there was a clean take of it without me laughing, so we couldn't use it anyway. In the notes about nothing, there was just one thing I wanted to mention. It was a quote from Jerry Seinfeld about Julia Louis-Dreyfus in Vanity Fair, and it's about her as a performer and why she should be a movie star. And his quote is, why shouldn't she be a movie star? Who else are they going to get? If you think about it, there are not a lot of beautiful, funny, intelligent actresses out there. You cannot find them. End quote. I love that this is a compliment for Julia Louis-Dreyfus, but I also think it's a very short-sighted quote. I don't think Jerry Seinfeld was trying to be offensive here, but it's also just like, well, what that shows me is that there weren't very many opportunities for women at the time, because I'm sorry, if there are a lot of roles and you audition more and more women, then you would be able to find plenty of women who are capable and who are beautiful and funny and intelligent. Well, and of course, the definition of beautiful at that time was much more narrow, I think, than it has evolved to be, which I'm so happy about. Certainly if you're talking about beauty in the white, skinny, traditional way, then yeah, maybe there weren't a lot of women like that. But I think if you expand that world and you create a lot more opportunities for these women, yeah, it's not going to be that hard to find them, Jerry. Jerry, come on. You can't just say you can't find actresses like he's describing out there when you don't create opportunities for them. So that's my little soapbox speech today. All right, so moving on to Contributor Corner. Greg had some thoughts this week. So first off, Greg says, growing up, I thought this was what living in New York City would be like and would be what you experienced in a typical day on the subway. Having lived here now for 4 years, I realize how dated this all feels. First off, the fact that they'd all end up in conversations with people who seem to be on the train for long conversations seems ridiculous. I do like the cameos from the actresses who played Mrs. Rossini, yes, from Who's the Boss, and Mr. Carosi from Saved by the Bell, yes. The exhibitionist man was Mr. Carosi. When Zach worked at the country club, I think the others worked there too. But anyway, yeah. Any Saved by the Bell fans would recognize this man as Mr. Carosi. He also played Pumbaa in the Lion King movies. Okay, so I guess what Greg is saying here is that these types of conversations would never happen in real life on the subway. Greg, I'm just going to have to defer to your expertise here. I don't have a lot of subway writing experience. Next, Greg says, so much of this episode is weird to me. The fact that a lesbian wedding is so shocking to people is cringeworthy to see now. Jerry, for some reason, so tired at that time of morning that he can't even stay awake seems odd, and once again, as if they couldn't find something for him to really do. George skipping out on a promising job interview to hook up with a woman he just met seems out there even for him. Yeah, I'll get more into this with my final notes, but yeah, nothing in this whole episode really works for me. I'm trying to remember. They do say, I believe in the notes about nothing, that it is explained why Jerry is so tired. And I believe it was that he had met a woman the night before. So I think we're meant to believe like he hooked up with someone and that's why he's so tired. But yeah, there's no explanation. It's just like, okay, Jerry's really tired. I already went into it, I guess, with the whole lesbian wedding thing. Yeah, it's cringeworthy now, but very true to the time. For me, I'm just recognizing that, hey, I give them credit for putting it in there. And they put it in there, the negativity associated with it is with a homophobic character. They don't punch down to the actual event of a lesbian wedding or that Elaine's part of it. So I like that. But I think I just accept that the fact it's 30 years ago, of course, this woman might have this reaction. So it's cringy, yes, now, but I recognize that that's just how it was back then. Different time. Is that what we all say? Different time. Greg goes on to say, the shining spot in this episode, as in most, is Elaine. Her escalating panic on the train that stopped with the interior monologue is one of my favorite moments of the whole series, especially when, for a brief moment, she is happy that the train starts moving, and the immediate motherfucker right when it stops again is brilliant. There is one line that always sticks with me when I get stuck on a train, and it's when she says, why couldn't I have taken a cab? For $6, my whole life could have changed. I like that too. I think we all do that. Whatever situation we're in, we always curse ourselves for not doing the alternative or our other choice, right? We're just convinced that if we had done it the other way, none of the bad stuff would have happened. The mother effer part is really, really fun to me. And I think that is probably the brightest moment. And finally, Greg says, there is one adorable moment in the last scene, and I'm not sure if it's actually JLD breaking character, but the way Jerry breaks her funk by saying, you'll catch the brisk. That little smile like she's almost going to laugh is just off the charts adorable. Well, Greg, that is her breaking. So she was originally supposed to say, blow it out your ass at that point. So in the commentary, she says, look, I laughed there because I'm thinking about how I couldn't say that line. So it's just her breaking, but I agree. It's so adorable because she kind of looks down and is trying to hide the fact that she is about to giggle. Thank you so much, Greg. Love your thoughts as always. And if you'd like to become a contributor to Hot and Heavy, please email me at elainepodcast@gmail.com. That's elainepodcast@gmail.com. My favorite Elaine moment, well, it's really just all the voiceover stuff. Like JLD said, it's a fun acting exercise, and it's really impressive. When voiceover is done well, it's so impressive. I just heard how, and I didn't realize this was, I guess I should have realized it, but I didn't realize that you can win a Grammy for doing voiceover in like an audiobook. And I have to say, I just listened to probably one of the best audiobook performances I have ever heard. And no surprise, it's a very famous actress, Rosamund Pike, who, for me, I know her best from Gone Girl. She narrates the book A Slow Fire Burning by Paula Hawkins. I mean, I know it sounds weird because it's just listening to a voice, but if you want to hear an exceptional performance in audio form, Rosamund Pike, and it's a fantastic book too, by the way. But anyway, this is all just to say that voiceover is an art form, and I'm actually hoping to get more into voiceover stuff. So I think JLD did such an amazing job here. And I love that she loves and recognizes how it's just such a fun exercise as an actor. All right, so my final notes. I've never really loved this episode. Like, for all the extra production effort in the subway, it just doesn't pay off for me. And to echo what JLD said in the commentary, it's just not as fun if the main four aren't together or interacting during the episode. At least two of the four, or like, some combination of them all interacting. And all the guest stars were great, but I guess it was just too disjointed for me. This whole thing of all of them being separated, it could have worked better if the storylines were funnier. But to me, they were just okay. And they weren't very Seinfeldian, which I think was the downfall of making this maybe a better episode. Like Jerry George and Kramer's plots, they were all too far-fetched for me. Elaine was the only one that was having a pretty realistic experience on the subway. I mean, even as someone who doesn't ride a subway, I can see it being, this was the grounded one. This was the one I feel like Larry David would have maybe more fun with, because it's just those little things that get, elevated by some humor, but it's relatable stuff. So Elaine was the only one that had that kind of a plot line in this episode. It breaking down, dealing with a stinky person next to her, something's brushing on her leg that she can't, see, regretting not taking a cab, and all that frustration. It works. But even that, that gets a little bit tedious after a while, after a couple of scenes. It's like, well, you can't keep that going, and certainly not for every single one of them. But, so I think all in all, it was a good experiment that I respect Larry Charles for trying to do this, kind of all these four separate stories. I just don't think it was executed very well. And I think that's all I can say about the subway. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next time.